Hello everyone and welcome back to TowerGate. It is TowerGate day number 732. 732, March the 25th, 2019, Monday. Thank you so much for tuning in. Okay, just a reminder at the beginning of the video, because a lot of times people don't actually watch the entire video. So for those of you who watch like the 10-minute crowd or whatever you are, this is the video that you want to do your comments for Dumbass of the Week. This will be the video, the comment section where I'll go to get the nominations to tally up the votes for Dumbass of the Week. So if you want to vote for Dumbass of the Week, it's the comment section in this video that I'll be looking at. So don't forget to do that before you click off at the 10-minute mark or wherever it is. Alrighty. So anyway, I'll go through it again at the end of the video, but I want to get up front for those of you who don't make it through the whole video. Now, I don't know why you wouldn't. This is going to be a great video. And a lot of times the main topic I cover comes from the middle to the end of the video. So you really want to be here you might be better off to skip to the middle and work to the end if you're going to skip some of it. Anyway, let's go ahead and talk about the first thing up. But I want to focus primarily most of the video today on that situation in Ukraine, because I believe that this is probably the next thing that's going to come up that is going to sort of, I don't want to use the word smoking gun, but the things that we're going to learn and what we have already learned from what's going on in the Ukraine is going to end up being very important to getting this investigation really ramped up and really focusing on the key player here, which is the rotten Reverend Clinton, as I have said since first week of doing TowerGate videos, to get the focus on the rotten Reverend. And that's what you get when you look at the Ukraine situation. So I'm going to focus most of my video today on the Ukraine thing, but I do want to touch base on just obviously on probably the biggest issue of the day today, which is, of course, the letter written by Barr to the Congress and to all of us from what he's read in the Mueller report. So most people are saying, okay, well, it was no on collusion and no on obstruction. But really, if you look at the letter that Barr wrote, it's a clear no on, well, there's really three things. On the issue of Russia interfering in the election, Uncle Bob says, yes, Russia definitely hacked the DNC. Now, I would love to see his evidence for that. Because if he's just using the CrowdStrike stuff, or he's using what other people have said, to me, that's not how you conduct an investigation. You don't conduct an investigation by using other people's hearsay, which is what CrowdStrike was. They were hired by the rotten Reverend Clinton's lawyer, Mr. Sussman. They refused to turn their servers over to the FBI and the DOJ. So I don't think that Uncle Bob somehow went and got the original servers, or went to the cloud server companies who probably had that stuff backed up on cloud servers. I don't think he actually went and looked at any raw data, or if he had any type of a really good IT team look into that to verify who actually got into the DNC computers, if anybody. So that's the first point. He automatically credits in the report that Russia hacked the DNC. I would love to see the evidence for that. I would love to see it. The second issue is whether Trump or anyone on his team colluded with the Russians to rig the 2016 election. And of course, that is a big, flat, resounding no. No evidence whatsoever to support the idea that Trump or anyone on his team colluded with Russia to rig the 2016 elections or anything else. That's a big, fat goose egg, a zero. Now, on the other issue, the obstruction, what this cowardly goon, Uncle Bob, does is he basically says, well, on the issue of obstruction, we're not sure. We're going to leave it up to you, AG Barr. It's like, you got to be kidding me. I'm sure Barr was pissed when he read that. I mean, this is, I know why he did it. Uncle Bob's job was two major things. Number one, to cover up and protect the evidence that would incriminate his friends and now him. That was his number one job, cover up and protect the evidence that would prove what they all did. That was the most important thing, because I knew there was no Trump-Russia collusion. And the number two thing was to keep the focus on Trump and the pressure on Trump, and to keep all the prying eyes away from the real crimes. But Uncle Bob ran this thing out, and he was supposed to run it out for 4 years, or until they could drive Trump from office. But he saw the public opinion polls, more than 50% in a poll just 2 weeks ago, showing most people believe it's a witch hunt. At which point, public pressure is what forced him to shut it down. He couldn't go any farther. But he had to leave the door open for the Dems, because that was what his job was. He had to leave the door open so that you could have this sort of hanging out there issue on the obstruction, so that they could continue to work that for a couple more years through these leftists in the Southern District of New York or wherever. And Barr is not going to let that stuff go. He's going to shut that stuff down. So it was a failed attempt by Uncle Bob to leave a crack in the door so that idiots like Nadler and Schiff and all the rest of these guys can use that to keep this big question of whether or not Trump was guilty of obstruction, and to open the door so that they can launch investigations, do all these things, when his very freaking job was to either slam the door shut or open it wide open and say, yes, here's the sunlight, here's all the things that happened, and here's the proof, I'm going to recommend this. And that's not what he did. His job was to come to a decision. When you're a prosecutor, I mean, who's ever heard of a prosecutor taking on a case, going in, doing the investigations, getting to the end of it and going, oh, well, I just don't know. We'll just leave it up to whoever. I'll just pass this along to my boss and he can decide. That never happens with a prosecutor. As a prosecutor, your job is to find out, did they or didn't they? If you cannot prove the case, it didn't happen. If you cannot prove your case, you don't bring the indictment, and you don't suggest, well, I really couldn't find the evidence, I don't think, not really sure, I'll let you decide. Barr's got to be pissed. And of course, Barr obviously read it and said, well, that's some bullshit. No, he didn't collude. And what's all the evidence that they give Barr? That, well, he may have obstructed. And what are they using? Is this example that he may have obstructed? Because he said in a public space, televised speech in front of freaking millions of people that, hey, Putin or Russia, if you got those 3,000 emails, the media would love to get them. That's it. What a coward. What a dope. What a dope. You have no evidence of, I mean, if he had evidence of obstruction, he should have made the charge. At least ways Trump can go to court and defend himself. You leave it up in the air right now, and it's just left up there floating. Trump can't really go to court about it because he wasn't charged. But yet he's not really clear of it because Uncle Bob the executioner couldn't decide. And he leaves it up to Barr. Well, Barr just didn't spend 2 years going through this freaking thing. He did. Uncle Bob did. And that's probably what Barr's thinking. He's going, what do you mean? You want me to decide? You're the one who just spent 2 freaking years and all these resources, tens of millions of dollars, 15, 20 prosecutors, lawyers, investigators, hundreds of wiretaps, millions of documents. You've gone through all that, and then you look at me and say, I should decide? So what we're looking at here is Mueller did the best he could do for the team. He gave them a little crack in the door so that they could spend another 2 years, or God knows how long, working this thing for obstruction. He opened the door for more bullshit when people are tired of the bullshit. That's why they wanted this thing finished. I mean, either do it, either charge him with obstruction or not. What a coward! What a dope! You know, I was leaning very, very heavily for James Comey for Dumbass of the Week, but I think that Uncle Bob the Executioner's just locked up that first spot in my mind. What a dumbass. You spend 2 years, you go through all this, and then you come back with oh, I don't know, I'll let you decide. Lock his ass up. And he had to discover a long time ago that there was no collusion, yet he let the country go through another God knows how long. His entire investigation, just as Trump said, was based on a fraud. And he knows that. He probably figured that out within a couple weeks. He should have shut his own damn program down a long time ago. He said, hey man, I just realized that my entire investigation is based on a fraud. I gotta shut it down. Sorry. And that's not what he did. What a bastard. This guy, definitely in my mind, Uncle Bob just moved to #1 position for Dumbass of the Week. Comey, in my mind, is at 2. But of course, I'll consult with all of you before the decision is made. Whew. Okay, so that's all I have. I could spend an hour just bitching about this. but I'm sure most of you feel pretty much the same way. Now, let's get on to this Ukrainian stuff, because there's a lot here. And so I'm going to be going through a lot of facts and things, and I'll try to break it down as I go. It's not too confusing, but, I'll go through it. And the reason is because as we begin following, because I'll be following this Ukrainian situation every single day, it's going to be important as we move forward. It's going to tie in, and it locks in the Right Reverend Clinton to be just what I've said, is the mastermind of this whole plot. And we'll figure more of that out as we go through this. So I just want to go through all the facts that we now have from where we are today, so that we start from a very good point, so that as we move forward and as I do more reports on what's going on a daily basis, as information comes out, what we're learning from this Ukrainian situation and their meddling in the presidential election, working with the Democrats, and at this point we now know the FBI, and Comey specifically, Comey and Clinton. Want to make sure that we're all very well grounded and we have a good foundation and we understand the basic facts here, so that as we move forward and get more facts, we're building on the foundation we already have. We already have this knowledge of these facts up to this point. So this is going to be going through a bunch of the facts that we already know now about the Ukraine situation. So let's start right here. So we have this top Ukrainian prosecutor, Yuri Lutsenko, Lutsenko, Lutsenko. He has opened an investigation into whether the country's law enforcement illegally, and I assume he's talking about the Ukrainian version of the FBI, into whether the country, Ukraine's law enforcement agency, illegally leaked info to influence the 2016 U.S. presidential election. That's what this is about. So the investigation was prompted by the release of an audio recording of a top Ukrainian law enforcement official saying his agency released damaging information on the Trump campaign chairman, Paul Manafort, in order to damage Trump and boost Clinton. So he's got a tape. He has got the tape of this high-level law enforcement official, which we can assume is kind of like an FBI type guy. And he's saying openly on tape that they released this information for the purpose of, it's dirt on Manafort, to damage Trump and help Hillary. The leaked information found its way into the hands of the U.S. media in 2016 and led to Manafort's being removed from the campaign. So it was this leak by the top people there, Ukrainian law enforcement, that led to Trump having to fire Manafort because of the media story. Now, one of the early stories on Manafort was about Manafort's dealings with Oleg Deripaska, and this was a story written by Michael Isikoff at Yahoo News. Isikoff was working with Alexandria Chalupa, who was working for the DNC as a consultant in Kiev. Chalupa met frequently with top Ukrainian officials, top Ukrainian officials in the Ukrainian embassy in Washington. Lutsenko is focusing on Artem Sitnik, S-Y-T-N-Y-K, who was the director of the NABU, the National Anti-Corruption Bureau of Ukraine. Sitnik is accused of working to benefit Clinton in the 2016 election. It's believed that he was one of the 3 people on the tape. The FBI had set up an office in Kiev. Now, this was under the Obama administration back in 2014. The FBI set up an office in Kiev, in the embassy, to assist the Ukraine government with their Manafort investigation. This was in 2014. Now, this is very rare. I mean, there's lots of FBI and CIA guys in embassies all over the world. Everybody does it. But they normally give them covers. It's generally considered a covert thing. It's very rare that you see any country actually open an FBI or CIA office literally inside the embassy, but that's exactly what the Obama administration did in 2014. So the FBI had their own office inside the embassy. Now, Trump tweeted out on March the 21st, he says, this is just this past couple days ago, as Russian collusion fades, the Ukraine plot to help Clinton emerges. So Trump is already on top of this. Now, the FBI investigated Manafort in 2014, but declined to prosecute. The FBI had set up an office inside the Ukrainian embassy in Kiev at that time. And apparently, they never left. Prosecutor Lutsenko has also accused the Obama administration era at the U.S. Embassy in Kiev of interfering in corruption cases in Ukraine. Lutsenko says he has a list of people whose prosecutions he was advised not to pursue. So here we have the Obama administration meddling in the internal affairs of Ukraine, telling their top prosecutor not to mess with these certain people. Now, the U.S. ambassador during the Obama era declined to cooperate in an investigation into misappropriation of U.S. aid. The Obama administration was protecting various people who this prosecutor wanted to investigate. The State Department has responded by calling Lutsenko's claims a fabrication. In 2018, Representative Pete Sessions wrote a letter to Mike Pompeo asking him to call Ambassador Marie Yovanovitch, to recall Ambassador Marie Yovanovitch for voicing her disdain for Trump and his administration. She even went so far as to tell Ukrainian officials to ignore Trump because he was going to be impeached. This woman was literally the Ukraine ambassador in Kiev for the United States during the first 2 years of the Trump administration and prior to that for the Obama administration, and she's over there telling them to ignore Trump. He's going to be impeached. She's also blocking and contributing to the effort to block this prosecutor from being able to do his job in his own country. Now, this audio tape, it's a conversation between three men, and one is believed to be Sitnik, and it mentions the so-called Black Ledger being transferred to Hillary Clinton. The Black Ledger was this book that had all these transactions that Manafort was engaged in, including with Yanukovych's people and others. So, but the most important thing here is that this audio tape that they have with this conversation between these three men, one of them on the tape says that the information from the Black Ledger was transferred to Hillary Clinton. Now, it doesn't say directly to Hillary Clinton or through an intermediary or something like that, but he just says that they got this information to Hillary Clinton. Now we know where she got the Russian collusion delusion. Politico wrote a story just days after Trump was sworn in. Let me say that again. Politico wrote this story just days before Trump was sworn in about the alleged effort by Ukrainian officials to boost Clinton. The article stated that Ukrainian government officials tried to help Hillary Clinton and undermine Trump by publicly questioning his fitness for office. I remember it well. They also disseminated documents implicating Manafort in corruption, and said they were investigating the matter, only to break away after the election. So just prior to Trump being elected, they're all over it. Then all of a sudden Trump wins the election, and boom, they go quiet. They shut up. They stop talking about it. Tells you it was political. Ukrainian officials have admitted to helping Clinton allies with research of damaging information on Trump and his advisors. Alexandra Chalupa was a key player in the exchange of information and documents. Just as I said in my timeline, you can go back and read it. It's been in there for well over a year. You can go back and read it. Chalupa was getting this information from government officials, and she was passing it on. And other people were involved in that as well. We don't know who all of them were, but we can have some pretty good ideas now that we know that Comey put an FBI office directly in the embassy, and they were working with Ukrainian government officials. So both the FBI and Clinton and her campaign people and the DNC were literally being fed this information, fed to them from these Ukrainian government officials by illegally releasing these documents to them. This created the basis for the Trump-Russia collusion and association with Manafort, and that's where this all began. Now, Chalupa admitted that she tipped off the DNC to Manafort's activities after Trump brought him into the campaign. So there you go. Just as soon as Trump brings Manafort into the campaign, off goes Chalupa with an armful of these documents and stuff from the Ukrainian government, and where she starts to give the information which would begin the point where they would start building this crazy Russian collusion delusion. Right here, we can see it all where it's developing. Now, Trump first learned of this in July of 2017 and asked Sessions to look into it. So there we go. Trump was aware of this. He'd gotten this information from someone, obviously, in 2017. There had already been 2 or 3 stories written about it by then. And, of course, he asked Sessions to look into it. Then, a NABU official told the New York Times in August of 2016, the New York Times is told that Comey's FBI had an office in the embassy in Kiev and that they were working closely together. There you go. Comey's got his FBI people in there. They're coordinating with, exchanging documents, getting information with these corrupt Ukrainian officials. They're at the same time giving the information to Chalupa. She's going back and giving it back to the DNC and the Right Reverend Clinton. And then, of course, we have these 3 other individuals on the tape talking about giving the information to Hillary Clinton. Now, Serhiy Leshchenko, L-E-S-C-H-E-N-K-O, was the main spokesman for the accusations against Manafort and is likely the source of the New York Times story. Leshchenko was convicted of interfering in the U.S. 2016 election in December of 2018. This past December, he was convicted of interfering in the 2016 U.S. election. Leshchenko, of course, as I mentioned earlier, works closely with George Soros and Viktor Pinchik. Leshchenko also claims to have a source. He will not disclose who that is. But it's believed to be someone, obviously, in the FBI, the DOJ, or possibly the State Department. Viktor Pinchik is, of course, was Hillary Clinton's single largest donor to her campaign in 2016, $8.6 million. Now, the Politico story of 2017 suggested that Chalupa was working with Ukrainian Ambassador Chale to get dirt on Manafort and Trump. And then we have this other person, Andrei Telizhenko, T-E-L-I-Z-H-E-N-K-O, was the source for Politico. After the story, Telizhenko was, after the story broke in Politico, Telizhenko was forced to flee Ukraine. But as we sit here today, Telizhenko is saying he is willing to testify to Congress and tell what he knows. Then we have Nellie Ohr. She tells Congress in her interview with Congress that in her testimony that Leshchenko, the man who was already convicted of interfering in the 2016 election, that Leshchenko was a source for Fusion GPS during the 2016 campaign. So here we have this guy not only leaking documents, giving stuff to Chalupa that he's getting through the official government law enforcement agency, we assume something like the FBI. He's passing this information to the FBI. He's coordinating with Chalupa. They're giving this information directly to the Right Reverend Clinton. And they're also communicating with Glenn Simpson over at Confusion GPS. What this Ukrainian story does is, number one, it gives us a lot more insight into what we pretty much already knew, which was that this was the root of the Trump-Russia collusion delusion narrative. This is where the narrative began. And also that this was a coordinated effort from the very beginning to take down Trump, and that the FBI was coordinating with these corrupt Ukrainian government officials in that effort. But more importantly, the rotten Reverend Clinton was there at the very beginning of this. They are the ones who created the Russian collusion delusion narrative. And that the rotten Reverend Clinton and the DNC were being fed this information from these crooked Ukrainian officials directly to her campaign, and possibly, depending on how literally you take that audio tape, directly to her. As I have said, since week one of doing these TowerGate videos over 2 years ago, the rotten Reverend Clinton is the puppet master. She's the mastermind of this operation. She planned, directed, organized, and controlled this entire operation. She and the small people around her in her inner circle created the Trump-Russia collusion delusion. Then they hired Confusion GPS to write the narrative. They pumped it full of garbage. They laundered it through Christopher Steele, who he, along with Confusion GPS and others, pumped the garbage out into the media, including people over at the FBI and probably CIA and DOJ, pumped this stuff back out to the media where they wrote stories on it, and then the FBI turned around and used that as the evidence to start their investigations and launch the wiretaps and do the national security letters and the unmaskings and the FISA warrants. And that eventually evolved into Uncle Bob's illegal investigation. Unbelievable. Unbelievable. There it is. There it is. Russians? How long have I been saying what Russians? The only Russians I'm aware of are not real Russians. They're people who are from Russia, born in Russia, but the supposed Russian sources are a bunch of guys living in New York, hanging out with Democrats. It appears to me that the real sources for all this bullshit came from these corrupt Ukrainian officials. And this was all stuff about Manafort and his business dealings working for and representing Yanukovych, as was Podesta, as was this guy Greg Craig. They were all working for exactly who Manafort was working for. But Manafort is the only one going to prison. Podesta and Mr. Craig apparently are not being indicted. Unbelievable. This is a very important aspect of the story, and it may be the thing that blows this wide open. It's certainly the thing. Everybody's focused on the DOJ and the FBI and the CIA and all that, and they should be, and the Deep Agency, Six Agency Task Force. Yes, we have to focus on all these things. But, as I said, you get to the bottom of this thing, you're going to find the rotten Reverend Clinton. This was her operation. She created this entire ball of shit. She created it all. Her and a bunch of goons sitting around, probably Blumenthal and Tony Podesta and her what's his name, Podesta, his brother, Tony Podesta's brother, her campaign manager. They probably sat around her kitchen, drank up a bunch of wine, and stumbled onto this bullshit and decided to throw it in motion. Exactly what happened. Well, a few more items. We have received, of course, from the recent these few texts that we just got from Loose Lisa Page that were on a personal device. We're learning more things, bombshell things. These most recent texts certainly indicate that the White House was briefed on the Spygate operations. On October 19th, Page wrote to McCabe, meeting with White House counsel is set up. And she's talking about the one where they brought in Sally Yates to browbeat the one guy in the DOJ who was questioning the validity of the Steele's claims in the dossier. The Obama White House has denied knowing anything about surveillance or spying on the Trump campaign or on any American citizen. That's their position up until now. The Obama White House has denied knowing anything about surveillance or spying on the Trump campaign or any American citizen, despite the fact that we have October 19th, one of Lisa Page's text with Annie McCabe, where she's talking about this meeting that they're going to have with the White House counsel, and Sally Yates is going to be running it. And this is the meeting where they had to get together and put peer pressure on the DOJ lawyer, who was the one guy who was looking at the entire application, the FISA application, the information for the application, and having serious doubts about whether it was legit. And this was the meeting where they had to beat him down. Many lies have been told by people in the Obama administration and the deep state, the FBI. I mean, these people are just full of many contradictory statements that don't line up. Lots of lies, half-truths, mistruths, you name it. There's a lot of people with a lot of problems. And when you get into this Ukrainian issue, I mean, you can get into this Ukrainian thing as much as you want. I mean, there's a whole other angle here that I'm not even talking about, that I'm probably going to leave on the sidelines until it becomes front page news, and it probably eventually will if Joe Biden throws his hat in the ring. And that is the fact that Joe Biden has a very close relationship with these Ukrainian officials, the very ones we're talking about. They were the very ones that were behind the leaking of the Black Ledger to U.S. persons. Alexandria Chalupa is believed to be one of those persons, obviously. Ukraine, she, of course, a former DNC employee. Ukraine officials also have had frequent contacts with the U.S. embassies in Kiev, which we discussed previously. So yes, this was not just, you know, a very covert thing going on, feeding Chalupa, feeding Hillary, or who else. I mean, this was going through official channels. This was these were corrupt officials in the Ukrainian government going to the U.S. embassy in Kiev and sharing this information with them. So they were doing it through covertly, sending it to Fusion GPS, sending it to news organizations. They were writing stories on it. They were giving it to Chalupa. They were feeding the DNC and Hillary. At the same time, they were even going through official channels through the embassy, where the FBI had an office installed by Comey. Man, oh man. And yeah, Joe Biden, there's a lot of things that went on there. Joe Biden is up to his eyeballs in association with these very same individuals that we're talking about, being part of the beginning of the Russian collusion delusion and all the things that they were doing. Biden is very closely connected to these very same people. And of course, there's a lot of things going on there with business dealings, his son getting this position on the board of this company there, this energy company. There's a lot there. I don't want to confuse the two things together, so I'm going to keep that separate on the sideline. I'm going to be focusing primarily in the Ukraine issue on this Ukrainian issue and how it relates to the original Spygate narrative, the Russian collusion delusion. This is where it began. If you go look at my timeline, you will see the very first thing on my timeline. Notice the second thing. The second entry on my timeline is discussing the activities in Ukraine in 2014. And throughout my timeline, you can see various things. But now I'll be filling it in because there's a few other things that I now have that I did not have previously, which I'll be going on to my timeline and filling in the missing pieces there. As more and more of the Ukrainian involvement in this conspiracy begins to work its way into the narrative. And I expect that it's not going to be long, a couple of days, a week or two at the most, before this stuff that we're talking about right now is going to find its way into the mainstream, and a lot of people are going to be asking a lot of questions. So like I said, it's this is the video to get your nomination in for Dumbass of the Week. There's some really good candidates out there. Of course, we have Cortez. We have Little Miss Piggy McCain. What's her name? Megan McCain. Magoo. We have Megan Magoo. Of course, I thought that Comey would have this thing locked up based on the comments he made 2 days ago. But now, after looking at the letter that Uncle Bob has just sent William Barr, I can only assume that Mueller has taken a top slot here, because to be the prosecutor and to actually come forward with the report at the end of your 2-year investigation and to say, well, I don't know, you decide. The job of the prosecutor is to investigate, and if there's enough evidence to go forward with charges, you bring charges. If not, you shut up. What a dumbass. Thank you so much for tuning in. I'll be back tomorrow with more TowerGate. See ya. Bye.